Let's take a look at today's thinking. We have how do we solve quadratic inequalities? Quadratic inequalities. When asked to solve a quadratic inequality, we will need to use our knowledge of solving a quadratic equation. So what are these steps? Step 1, set the inequality to 0. Similar to when we solve an equation. We are going to, if possible, factor. Step 3, set each factor equal to 0 to obtain the critical numbers. Step 4, place these critical numbers on a number line. Step 5 is use interval testing. Interval testing is going to determine what the solutions are. And then we are going to write our solution or solutions using interval notation or any other notation asked for. So let's take a look at question number 1. We have given the following: -3 is greater than or equal to x squared plus 4x. We want to A, solve the inequality using inequality notation and interval notation. For B, we want to graph the solutions on a number line. All right, so let's start with part A. First thing we are going to do is get this inequality equal to 0. Next, we are going to factor. So we're using the AM method. Two numbers that multiply to 3 and add up to +4. Set each of these factors equal to 0 using that zero product property. And we get our solutions to be x equals -3 and x equals -1. Now, our original problem is an inequality, not an equation. So here is where things slightly change. So I am actually going to skip over to B, the graphing portion of this. So this is my interval testing. So I am going to place the x solutions on my number line in order. We have x is -3 and x is -1. Let's place them there. So what we want to do is we want to determine a number below -3. So let's pick maybe -5. A number that falls somewhere in between -3 and -1. Let's say -2. And a number to the right of -1, which 0 looks like a nice number to work with. Here we are going to test these numbers that we added on the number line in green. So what we're going to do is we're testing if x equals -5. Now, where are you going to test? You are going to test this x value in the original inequality. So I'm going to replace all of my x's with -5 and calculate. So here, -5 squared would give us a 25. And if I do 4 times -5, that's a -20. So 25 minus 20 would be a 5. Here is our statement. -3 is greater than or equal to 5. Now this statement is false, which means that our solution cannot be here. Now, as of right now, what I'm thinking is if it can't be here, it has to be somewhere over here, my solution. So here is where it's important for you to test each of these pieces. So instead of me testing -2, I am actually going to test out what happens if I input 0. So my next test would be, let's see what happens if I input 0. Is that part of my solution still? Again, when you do your test, you are including it into the original inequality. And here I would have a statement that says -3 is greater than or equal to 0. Now again, this statement is false, which means that this piece here is false. So now just looking at this squiggle that I wrote, my answer has to be here. Now, to confirm, if you like, you can do a test to figure that out. But I know that it cannot be in there. It has to be below this. But we've already concluded that it cannot be where I wrote -5. So what is my solution? Graphically, let me erase this part and actually input it. We're going to open circle at -3, and that is going to be included. Why included? Because the inequality is an or equal to. We're going to go to -1. Again, shade that circle in because it's or equal to inequality. And all these numbers in between would satisfy the given inequality. So now let me go back to part A. I've officially finish my test. I see the graph in front of me. I am going to write this using inequality notation. So as an inequality, so we're starting at -3 being the lowest number. That's less than or equal to my input, which is x, which is less than or equal to -1. There is my answer using inequality notation. If I want interval notation, that would be bracket -3, comma, -1 bracket. Both ends are included. Let's take a look at number 2. So here we have an inequality for x squared minus 8x is less than 10x minus 14. We want to do the same thing, solve for x. This time our answer only in interval notation. And we want to graph the solutions on this number line. Sometimes they ask us to graph it, sometimes they don't. So I do suggest you graph your solutions all the time just because it's easier to visualize the answer. All right, so let's start off by setting this quadratic in terms of equals 0. So some sort of equation. All right, so here's my move. I moved 10x over by subtracting it, and I added 14 to the front piece of the quadratic. At this point, let us factor. So I do see there's a GCF. Here I have AC method, so I'm going to do my AC method just because that's my preference. I'm focused on the quadratic, basic AM. If I am working with a C method, I have to remember to bring back the original A term, which in this case was 2, divide each by 2. If you can simplify, you simplify. If not, bring that denominator in front of your variable. All right, so now I have my factors. I have my original GCF of 2. I have the factors 2x minus 7 and x minus 1. I set each of these factors equal to 0. 2 cannot equal 0, so I have my solutions of 7/2 and 1. Now, I am going to do part B. I am going to graph it. I'm going to test out the solutions. I'm going to test out the interval. Where would my solution lie? All right, so in order, we have 1 would be the smallest number, 7/2, 3.5 would be bigger than that. I am going to pick a number below 1, 0, nice number to work with. I am going to pick a number somewhere in between 1 and 3.5, let's say 2. And I am going to pick a number that is greater than 3.5. Let's pick 5. Again, when you're choosing your values, you want to pick values that are easy to work with if possible. All right, so let's start with 0. if x equals 0, would this be true or would this be false? So let's input into the original inequality. And I like zeros, I like ones because they are easier to work with. So here we would have 0 is less than negative 14. Now 0 is not less than negative 14. So this is false. This is false. Again, what is this automatically telling me? That my answer has to be greater than. Okay, so here I am going to do the same thing. I am going to check out 5. When I check out x equals 5, I get a false statement as well, which means that my answer cannot be here, which by default, my answer falls between 1 and 7/2. But this time, when I do my open circle, let me erase this. When I input my open circle, it has to stay open. Why? Because this is not an or equal to inequality. So it's going to be all of these numbers. So using interval notation, this would be parenthesis 1 comma 7/2 comma. All right, there's my answer. Let's try one more. Number 3, find the solutions for negative 3n squared plus 17n minus 14 is less than 4n minus 10 using interval notation. So here I did not specify for you to do the graphing portion of this, but you do want to have that graph, that number line, because that's going to tell you specifically what is true and what is false, which are my solutions and which are not. So I'm going to let you guys pause the video, try this on your own. All right, so here, this is what you should have gotten. Hopefully, we set the inequality equal to 0. I factored out a negative 1. My GCF, I had to do AC method. I factored my AC method, and I end up with my factors of negative 1 times n minus 4 times 3n minus 1. I find my critical values of n equals 4 and n equals 1/3. I place those critical numbers on my number line. And here, when I did my test of x equals 0 and x equals 1, I saw that those two places came out true, which means that the input of 1 would be false. You can test it out again and you can see this on your own. So how would you write this using interval notation? Well, the smallest possible x value you can have is negative infinity, and the largest would be 1/3. That is the front piece. That is this piece right here. And here we have an inequality that is not included, so this would be technically an open circle. And all these numbers would be part of your solution. So this would be a parenthesis. Now you want to union that with the other side. Open circle, all of these are solutions. So we are starting at 4 and going all the way to positive infinity, which are not included. So this would be the answer to this type of question. It is super important for you to do your graph, even if it is not stated, because that is where you will visually see these answers to the quadratic inequality. So keep learning, keep growing, and I will see you in the next video.